Welcome back to Inside Vietnam. If you've been with us for a while, you know what this channel is. You know the kinds of stories we tell here. Men who came to Vietnam looking for something, a fresh start, a second chance, a life that made more sense than the one they left behind, and found that what they were looking for cost considerably more than they'd budgeted for. Today's story is a little different, not because the outcome is different, though in some ways it is. It's different because the man at the center of it is not the kind of man you'd expect to find in a story like this. His name is Kobus van der Merwe. He's 54 years old. He's South African, from Pretoria, and he spent 24 years as a warrant officer in the South African National Defense Force, working in signals and logistics. This is a man who made precise decisions under pressure for a living, a man who ran the numbers, a man who, by his own account, did his research. And that's exactly what makes his story worth hearing. Because the same qualities that made Kobus exceptional at his job, the patience, the methodical thinking, the absolute confidence in his own analysis, those qualities did not protect him in Vietnam. In some ways, they may have made things worse. We're not going to tell you what happened. That's his job. But we will say this. If you're watching this channel because you're thinking about Vietnam, a retirement, a fresh start, a new life somewhere the numbers seem to add up, this one's going to stick with you. Not because it's dramatic. Because it isn't. Here's his story, in his own words. I spent 24 years in the SANDF, and I never once had to think about what came next. The institution does that for you. It tells you where to be, and when, and what to wear, when you get there. And there is something genuinely comfortable about that if you're built a certain way. And I'm built that way. Signals and logistics. I was good at it. I knew how to manage supply chains, how to track information flows, how to make sure the right resources arrived in the right place at the right time. That's what I did. That's what I was. When I retired in 2019, I was 51. The pension kicked in, $18,000 a month, which sounds like more than it is. It's not poverty, but it's not much either. Not in Pretoria in 2019 with a mortgage you no longer have because the divorce settled that particular question for you. Marlies kept the house in Centurion, she kept the furniture and the Labrador, and, if I'm being accurate about it, she kept the life. The Bry circle, the church friends, the neighbors who'd known us both for 12 years. I didn't contest any of it. I had an attorney who kept asking me if I wanted to push back on various items, and I kept saying no, just sort it out, and eventually he did. I moved into a flat in Sunnyside. Ground floor. The smell in the hallway was someone else's food, always. I never worked out whose. I lived there for 3 years, and I never worked out whose food that was. The pension arrived on the 25th of each month, and I checked my standard bank account most days, not because I was worried about money, but because I needed something to check. I had savings too, a lump sum from the settlement and some investments that had done reasonably well. In total, sitting there in my standard bank account, about $85,000, which is not a small amount of money. I want to be clear that I knew it was not a small amount of money. I had not lost my mind. But Sundays were long. That's the thing nobody tells you. Not about divorce specifically, but about the version of retirement I was living. The army gives you a structure, and the marriage gives you a social world. And when both of those things go at more or less the same time, what you're left with is a lot of days that need filling. I filled them. I walked. I read. I cooked for myself, which I'd never done much of, and turned out to be fine at. I watched rugby. I was, in the clinical sense of the word, fine. But fine is not the same as good. I think about that now. I was fine the way a car with no petrol is fine, structurally intact, just not going anywhere. I found the Facebook group in late 2021. Expats in Southeast Asia or something like that. One of those groups with 40,000 members where half the posts are someone's bar photo and the other half are someone asking about visa extensions. But there was this one post, a retired British police officer, been in Da Nang 3 years, posting a picture of his balcony, the South China Sea in the background, a bottle of 333 beer, and the caption said something like, R2 $2,000 a month, all in. Boys, come see for yourselves. I ran the numbers. Of course I ran the numbers. That's what I do. I looked at cost of living indexes, at average apartment rental prices in Da Nang and Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi. I looked at healthcare costs, at the weather patterns, at political stability scores. I made a spreadsheet. I compared Vietnam to Thailand, to Malaysia, to Portugal, to Bali. Thailand came back too chaotic. The political situation, the expat saturation, the particular kind of Westerner it seemed to attract. Malaysia was fine, but it felt corporate, the kind of place you'd move for a multinational posting rather than a new life. Portugal was too expensive and too far from nothing. Vietnam, specifically Da Nang, kept coming back as the best option on paper. Cost-to-quality ratio. Climate, infrastructure. Geographic stability. I am not embarrassed to tell you it felt like a logistics problem, and I solved it like a logistics problem. I did my research, that's what I told myself. I did my research. What I did not research, because it did not appear on any cost of living index, was what it would mean to arrive in a country alone at 53 with $85,000, and no social infrastructure, and a value system built by an institution that taught me, fundamentally, that you look after your people. That was the variable I left out of the spreadsheet. I bought the plane ticket in February 2022. One way, because I had run the numbers enough times to know I wasn't coming back to the Sunnyside flat. The hallway smell alone was enough to settle that question. I'm telling you now, I thought I was being strategic. I thought I had assessed the situation and was responding proportionally. That phrase, by the way, that's an S&F phrase, more or less. Assess the situation, respond proportionally. I had been saying it to myself for 30 years, and it had never once been wrong. In Vietnam, I said it to myself quite a few more times. Da Nang hits you before you're ready for it. I knew it would be hot. I'd read about the climate. I'd checked the average temperatures for March. I had the data. But data doesn't prepare you for stepping out of 11 in the Nang International at 11 in the morning and feeling like the air itself is pushing back against you. Wet heat. The kind that makes your shirt stick to your back before you've walked 20 meters. I stood outside the terminal with my 2 bags, and I thought, good. This is going to require adjustment. I can work with that. The taxi driver spoke no English, and I spoke no Vietnamese, and we managed fine. That's another thing the data doesn't tell you, how functional you can be in a foreign country, on goodwill and a phone with Google Maps. He dropped me at a guest house near Mae He I'd booked for the first week while I found something longer term, and I tipped him more than I should have, because I didn't yet understand the denominations, and I didn't want to underpay a man who'd done nothing wrong. The apartment near the beach took me 4 days to find, and it cost 10.5 million. Young a month, just over 420 ung. Serviced, meaning someone came twice a week to clean, which felt extravagant. But the cleaning was included in the price, so I let it be. Ground floor, small balcony, a kitchen I used mostly for coffee. The building had a security guard who sat at the front desk watching football on his phone and nodded at me every morning with the comfortable indifference of a man who has seen many foreigners come and go and expects to see many more. I found this reassuring. The motorbike I bought in the second week. A used Honda Wave, blue, 2018, from a Vietnamese man who'd posted it on one of the expat Facebook groups for 18 million, roughly 720. It ran well. I'd ridden in the field. I knew how to handle a vehicle. The Da Nang traffic was something else entirely, I'll admit that. The first time I merged onto the bridge over the Han River, I kept thinking there must be rules I'm not seeing, some order beneath the chaos. And eventually I understood that the order is the chaos. Everyone moves and everyone adjusts, and somehow it works. After 2 weeks, I was fine. After a month, I stopped thinking about it at all. I want to describe those first 6 weeks accurately, because they matter. They matter because they were real. I was not performing contentment for anyone. There was nobody to perform it for. I woke early, old habit, walked south along McKay before the heat got serious, ate bun bahu from a woman who had a cart set up on Tren Bahu Shing most mornings, 3 plastic stools and a pot that had been going since before I arrived and would be going long after I left. 30,000 pung. The broth was dark and rich and slightly spicy, and I ate it almost every day for 6 weeks. I'd been warned about the expat community, not warned exactly. People in the Facebook group talked about it in a way that was half affectionate and half cautionary. The bars near Mae Kay or you'd find the same men every afternoon comparing prices and grievances. I looked in through a few windows. I'm not being superior about it. I understand why men end up there. But I wasn't ready to become part of a group whose main shared activity was explaining how much better things used to be. Not yet. Maybe not ever. So I kept to myself, and I found a rhythm, and the rhythm was enough. I learned 10 words of Vietnamese and deployed them with probably too much confidence. Chin Chin Sha, Chin Chin Sha, Jin Chin Sha. The woman at the Bumbibo cart started greeting me by name, or what she called me, which sounded like Chumbiba, and I considered this a significant achievement. I was, as I said, almost aggressively fine. The coffee shop near the Han River was called something I could never pronounce properly. A small place tucked back from Biwashjung, with old wooden furniture that didn't match and a ceiling fan that worked when it felt like it. They made Ka Fei Trong there, egg coffee, which sounds wrong and tastes extraordinary, this thick foam of egg yolk and condensed milk sitting on top of the espresso, like a dessert that got lost and ended up in your cup. I went there 3 or 4 times a week in the afternoons. She was there on a Tuesday, sitting 2 tables away from me with a stack of student papers and a red pen, not looking up. She had the focused irritation of someone marking work that has disappointed her, which it clearly had, because I could see, even from that distance, that the red pen was getting a workout. I didn't approach her. I'm not that man. I ordered my coffee and opened my book, and that was the plan. She was the one who spoke first. "Excuse me," she said, in English, that was careful and precise in the way of someone who teaches the language and holds it to a standard. "Do you have a cable?" "For the phone." "My battery is dying, and I have 40 more papers." I had a cable. I gave it to her. She thanked me and went back to the papers. And then, I'm still not sure exactly how it happened. The way these things don't have a clear beginning, we were talking. Not about anything significant at first. About the coffee. About the ceiling fan. About the papers, which she described as a catastrophe of tenses. With a severity that made me laugh, actually laugh, which surprised me because I hadn't done it much in a while. Her name was Lynn. She was 38. She taught English at a private language academy not far from the university, and she had opinions about grammar, the way some people have opinions about politics, with complete conviction and zero tolerance for disagreement. I found this entertaining. I told her so. She said she found most Western men who came to Da Nang exhausting because they wanted Vietnam to rescue them from wherever they'd come from. She said this plainly, without hostility, as if it were simply an observation she'd made enough times to stop being surprised by it. I thought about that. I think about it now, for different reasons. I told her I hadn't come to be rescued. I'd come because the numbers made sense. She looked at me for a moment in a way I couldn't quite interpret, not skeptical exactly, more like she was filing the information away for later consideration. Then she went back to the papers. We talked for 40 minutes. I know because I checked my watch when I got home. Not because I wanted it to be over. Because I wanted it to be over. Bodax. Diaziek. I messaged her 2 days later on Zalo. She'd written her number on the back of a corrected quiz paper, which I thought was funny and also oddly fitting. She responded in 4 hours. Not immediately, not after a week, 4 hours. I noted this without quite admitting to myself that I was noting it. She was the most interesting person I'd spoken to in 3 years, maybe longer. And I was careful about that feeling, the way you're careful with something you're not sure you should be holding. Not careful enough, obviously, but careful. We didn't become a couple quickly. I want to make that clear, because when you tell a story like this, people assume you rushed into everything. That loneliness made you stupid from the first week. It wasn't like that. It was 6 weeks from that Tuesday in the coffee shop before I'd have called us a couple. 6 weeks of Zalo messages and 2 or 3 meetings a week and 1 weekend trip to Hoi An that I suggested carefully and she accepted without excessive enthusiasm, which I appreciated. Hoi An was her idea to go by motorbike, 4 hours each way on the coastal road, which I'd been wanting to do since I arrived. We stopped at a roadside stall somewhere past An Ban and ate banh mi with pâté and pickled vegetables standing next to our bikes in the heat, And she told me about one of her students, a 12-year-old boy who'd written an essay about his dog using exclusively the past perfect tense for every sentence, including sentences that described things happening at that moment. She found this both incorrect and somehow philosophically interesting. I told her it sounded like how I thought about my marriage. She considered this for a moment and then said, "Yes, that's the past perfect. Everything was already completed before it began." I'm not sure that's grammatically sound, but I've thought about it many times since. I paid for Xiaoyan, the guest house, the meals, the boat trip on the Thubayan River at dusk with the lanterns coming on. Around 7 million zhong total, roughly 280 for the whole weekend. I didn't think about it. You don't when you're happy. And I was happy in a way that felt, I keep coming back to this word, unfamiliar. Not the happiness of getting something you wanted, more like the happiness of finding out you were still capable of it. She was not performing interest in me. That was the thing. I've been around enough people running operations to know the difference between a person who is genuinely paying attention and a person who is making you feel attended to. Lynn asked me questions, and then listened to the answers, and then asked follow-up questions that proved she'd been listening. She pushed back when she disagreed. She once told me, during an argument about something I can't even remember now, that I reasoned like a man who had never been wrong in a professional context and had made the error of assuming this generalized. She wasn't wrong about that. She was curious about the Sandif, but not in the way people sometimes are, not wide-eyed about weapons or impressed by rank. She wanted to understand what 24 years inside an institution does to a person, how it shapes the way you think, whether I missed it. I told her I missed the clarity of it. She said that was the saddest thing she'd heard all week, and she'd been reading 12-year-olds' essays about dogs. The first financial involvement happened in October. Her phone died, not a slow death, just stopped one afternoon mid-conversation. She mentioned it the same way she mentioned most things, matter-of-factly, without drama. I took her to a shop near Leduan the next day, and we bought a replacement. Samsung, mid-range, 4.2 million, DOC, about 170. She said she would pay me back. I said she wouldn't. She said she didn't want it to be a thing. I said it wasn't a thing. And it wasn't to me. I'd been married. I know what relationships cost. A phone is a phone. She didn't ask twice. That mattered to me. In my experience, people who are working you ask twice. In November, her academy cut everyone's salary by 30%. Enrollment was down, some post-COVID restructuring, she explained. New competition from an online platform that undercut the physical schools on price. Her monthly income dropped from about 9 million prang teen to roughly 6.3, which is not much to live on in Da Nang. I covered the difference that month. About 850,000 prang teen, barely $35. She accepted it with the same mix of reluctance and practicality that I was coming to understand was just how she was, not grateful to the point of performance. Just accepting that sometimes people help each other, and that's what that was. She mentioned her father once, in passing, during dinner at a Kam Tam place near the apartment, on Huang Di Shu, rice with grilled pork, fried egg, a bowl of broth you drink alongside it, the whole thing about 60,000, Yong Zheng. She said his health was a worry, and then redirected to something else before I could ask a follow-up. I let it drop. She had her privacy. I respected that. I think about that moment now. The way she changed the subject. I could have asked more. I didn't. But here's what I want to tell you honestly, because this channel is about honesty, and I've agreed to be honest. I was genuinely happy. Not performing it, not telling myself I was. Actually sleeping well, waking up without dread, eating good food, riding my motorbike through a city that was becoming, not home exactly, but familiar in a way that felt earned. I had a person, a real one, as far as I could tell. And I was 53 years old and had spent 3 years in a Sunnyside flat with someone else's food smell in the hallway. So you will perhaps forgive me for not scrutinizing my own happiness too closely. By December, I had spent, across everything, meals, the Heian weekend, the phone, the salary supplement, incidentals, my own living costs, roughly $4,000 since arriving. My pension covered my apartment and food easily. The lump sum was largely untouched. I was living within my means, in a country that let me do that comfortably, with a woman whose company I valued. By any reasonable metric, the plan was working. A man who mistrusts fast things doesn't notice slow ones. I've worked out that this is true. I just worked it out too late to be useful. In late November, she told me one evening that she'd like me to meet her parents. She said it quietly, with her eyes on her phone, the way she said most significant things, without ceremony, as if the significance was your problem to manage, not hers. She said they lived in Quang Ngai province, about 3 hours south. She said her father wasn't well. She said she thought it was time. I said yes. Of course I said yes. What else do you say? The drive to Quang Nang takes you south on the coastal highway, and for the first hour, it's beautiful in the straightforward way that Vietnam often is, when you stop trying to interpret it. Green hills coming down to the sea, the occasional fishing village, a long bridge over a river mouth with boats below. Lynn drove her own bike. I followed. She knew the route without GPS, which I noted. She'd done it many times. The landscape changes around the 2-hour mark. Gets quieter. The towns get smaller and the buildings get more modest and the road gets more potholes. And there's less of everything. Less signage, less traffic, less noise. We stopped once at a petrol station where a teenage boy filled my tank without being asked, and I overpaid because the numbers were still new to me in smaller denominations. Lynn paid for her own fuel. I remember noticing that. The house was smaller than I'd expected. Not small. It was a proper structure, concrete, 2 stories, a small garden at the front with a frangipani tree and some vegetable pots. But it was precisely maintained in the way of people who have very little and tend what they have with complete attention. The gate latch was the kind you see everywhere in provincial Vietnam, a piece of bent wire looped over a post, and it worked perfectly. Someone had recently swept the path. Her mother came out before we parked, late 60s, small, moving quickly in that way, of women who have been managing households their entire lives and move as if there are always 6 things to do at once. She said something to Lynn in Vietnamese, and then looked at me and smiled with the kind of warmth that either is entirely genuine or is a very sophisticated performance of it, and I don't think it was performance. She fed me within 10 minutes. I was given a bowl of bom bibi before I'd fully sat down, and she stood nearby watching me eat with the focused satisfaction of someone who takes feeding people seriously. The father came out of a back room. Late 60s, tall, taller than I expected, and moving with the careful stiffness of a man who has learned to carry pain quietly. He shook my hand and held it for a moment and looked at me directly, which I respect. He didn't speak English. We communicated through Lynn and through the slightly awkward but functional body language of 2 men of roughly similar age who have both spent their lives in structured environments and know how to be civil under constraint. He was clearly in pain. You could see it in how he stood, how he eased himself into the chair at the table. He said very little during the meal, and when he did speak, it was to ask Lynn things about the drive, about Da Nang, practical questions. He didn't ask about me specifically. He didn't have to. I was there. That was enough. I liked him. I want to say that plainly. I liked the whole family. The mother's organized warmth, the father's contained dignity. They were people in a difficult situation who had not allowed the difficulty to become their personality. In the Sandef, you meet people like that. You learn to recognize the type. On the second visit, about 6 weeks later, in early February, Lynn explained the full picture more clearly. The father's knee condition was degenerative, the kind that doesn't resolve on its own. A Vietnamese public hospital could manage the pain to a point, but the surgery that would actually fix the joint meant a private facility in Da Nang or further. The cost was 40 million dong, about 1,600. She told me this during a walk in the evening, after dinner, while her parents were inside. She said she didn't want to ask me. She said she was telling me only because I had asked her once, back in Da Nang, whether everything was all right with her family, and she'd changed the subject, and she felt she owed me an honest answer to an honest question. She said she wasn't asking me for anything. I'm telling you now, he didn't ask. That's the thing I keep coming back to. The father never asked me for a single thing. He looked at me at that dinner table with the kind of quiet appraisal of a man assessing another man, and he asked nothing. That's what got me. I've dealt with men who ask for things, and men who don't, and the ones who don't are the ones I trust. I told Lynn I would cover the surgery. I told her it was a gift, not a loan, and I didn't want it discussed further. She argued with me about it, briefly and genuinely, not the performance of argument, the kind where someone protests just long enough to be thanked for protesting. She actually didn't want to accept it. She said she'd find another way. I said she wouldn't, and 40 million prakwon was a number I could manage without difficulty, and her father needed his knee fixed, and I didn't want to hear any more about it. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said thank you in the flat, serious way. She said, everything significant. Assessed the situation, responded proportionately. The surgery happened in March. It went well. The father recovered. I received, via Lynn, a photograph of him standing in the hospital corridor the day he was discharged, upright and without the stiffness. She sent it without comment. That was enough. Then, Min, the younger brother, was 22, had been at university in Da Nang studying engineering before the family money ran out 2 years earlier. His fees for one semester were 20 million won, about 800. I sent it via Lynn without a great deal of deliberation. He was 22. He wanted to be an engineer. 20 million won. When was 20 million won? Then, a motorbike for Min to get to his part-time work while he studied. 15 million ong, roughly 600 for a used Honda. Lynn mentioned it on a Tuesday evening while we were making dinner at the apartment on Trin Fu. Just mentioned it the way you mentioned something that might or might not require attention, and I said fine, let's sort it. Then, the roof. A coastal storm in April caused water damage to the back section of the family house. The repair cost 27 million ong, about 1,100. The request came via Zalo from Lynn with a photograph of the damaged section. One sent the money the same day. Each one of these requests came separately, weeks apart. Each one had a photograph, a context, a reason that was entirely real. The knee was real, the university was real, the motorbike was real, the storm damage was real. I know all of this because I've thought about it enough times to be certain none of it was invented. The family situation was exactly what it appeared to be. What I was not doing, what I failed to do, was exactly what I failed to do, was add any of it up. By June 2023, we were effectively living together. She kept some things there. A change of clothes, her marking, a Vietnamese grammar textbook she'd had since university that she occasionally consulted with the seriousness of a legal reference document. I had stopped thinking of the apartment as mine specifically. It had become ours in the easy, unannounced way that these things happen when you're not paying close enough attention to the process. It was a Wednesday evening in late June, Lynn on the sofa with her students' Zalo messages, me reading, when she mentioned, without looking up, that her mother had been talking about the land. The land proposition didn't arrive as a proposition. That's the thing I want you to understand. If she had sat me down and said, I have a plan, here's what I need from you, here's what you get in return, I like to think I'd have responded differently. Maybe not. But there would have been something to assess, a thing with edges that I could examine. Instead, it came the way everything significant came from Lynn, in pieces, over time, each piece arriving before the previous one had fully settled. The first mention was just information. Her mother owned a plot of land in Kunong, behind the family house. Had been in the family for years. Her mother had been thinking about what to do with it. That was all she said that Wednesday evening. I didn't respond much. I filed it. 2 weeks later, there was a builder, her mother knew. Local man, solid reputation. Land like that, it was a shame to leave it idle. In Kunong Nai province, a basic structure didn't cost much to put up. Again, just information. I nodded. Then, a few weeks after that, sitting on the balcony with 2 bottles of 333, the sea somewhere in the darkness beyond the buildings. What if it was ours? Not legally, she said this herself, unprompted, which I noted as a sign of honesty. She knew foreigners couldn't own land. She knew the law. The Sudra, the Red Book, would stay in her mother's name. But practically, functionally, Lynn and I would use it as a base. Her family would maintain it when we weren't there. We could go on weekends. It would be somewhere that was ours in the way things are yours before paperwork gets involved. I did my due diligence. I want to say that clearly because it matters to me that I did. I researched the land ownership laws in Vietnam. Foreigners cannot own land. That's absolute. They can own apartments, certain properties, with restrictions and a 50-year leasehold ceiling. But land, no. I knew this. I had known it since before I arrived. I posted a question in the expat Facebook group. framed carefully, no names, and a man who'd been in Vietnam 11 years replied that putting money into a structure on a partner's family land was common, was understood locally as a lifestyle investment, rather than a property investment, and was fine as long as you went in with clear eyes about the fact that legally you had nothing. He said a lot of people did it. I didn't consult a lawyer. I know. I'm telling you, I know. I know. I told myself it was equivalent to what I might spend on a decent car and a few holidays back in South Africa. $34,000 spread over several months, for a place we would actually use. A physical thing that would exist. I am a signals and logistics man. I understand the concept of sunk cost. I understood, going in, that if the relationship ended, I would walk away with photographs and nothing else. I accepted this with what I can only call a managed risk assessment, which is now a phrase I find difficult to say with a straight face. Construction started in August. The first transfer, $200 million, $8,000, for materials and foundation. The builder started work. I went down in September, and the concrete slab was poured, a clean rectangle in the red earth, the family's vegetable garden visible through the gap in the fence where the gate would eventually go. I took photographs. I put them in a folder on my laptop called Qing Ying. I thought, this is real. This is a thing that exists. The walls went up between September and October. Another 450 million yuan across 3 transfers, $18,000 for framing, brickwork, the roof structure. I visited again in October. The walls were up to window height. It looked like a house. It was going to be a house. I took more photographs. And then, in parallel, the visa situation began to deteriorate. My South African passport had been getting me 90-day tourist visas without much difficulty in 2022. By mid-2023, the enforcement environment had tightened considerably. Post-COVID, Vietnam was tightening regulations across the board, and the days of casual extensions at the immigration office were becoming less reliable. I needed a longer-term solution. I mentioned this to Lynn, and she mentioned Tuyen. Tuyen ran a visa and business services shopfront near the university on Le Duin, one of those narrow little offices that does everything from document translation to company registration to things that are never quite specified. He was in his 40s, brisk, spoke workable English, and had the particular confidence of a man who has sat across a desk from enough foreign nationals to know that what they want, above all, is to be told that their problem has a solution. He spoke the way contractors speak when they know you've already decided. I recognized it. I didn't act on the recognition. Tuyen's recommendation, a business visa supported by a shell company registration in my name. The company would be real on paper, a registered entity, theoretically conducting some form of consultancy. Cost, $6,200. This would give me legal grounds for a longer-term visa, renewable, more stable than the tourist extension cycle. He made it sound like standard practice, which in a sense it is. A lot of foreign nationals in Vietnam operate this way. I paid it. The document came through 3 months later and was, as I eventually understood, of ambiguous permanence. When I asked Tuyen about renewal terms, the answer was always that renewals were straightforward. They were not straightforward. But by the time I understood that, the 6,200 was long gone. Meanwhile, the house sent Zalo messages. Electrical connection to the grid, 32 million yuan, about 1,280. A photograph of the connection point, the utility poles visible in the background. The last cost, Lynn said. Almost done. A retaining wall. The slope on the north side of the property needed stabilizing. The builder had underestimated the gradients of an 8 million yuan. Roughly 3,100. A photograph of the slope, the exposed earth. A note from the builder in Vietnamese that Lynn translated as confirming structural necessity. I believe this because the photograph showed an obvious problem, and because I had spent 24 years in an environment where if there's a structural problem, you fix it. A water tank and pump system. No mains water connection available at the plot 28 million. In early November, I sat down at my laptop, a Sunday evening, Lynn at the academy for a staff meeting, the ceiling fan moving the warm air around, and I opened a new spreadsheet. I put in every transfer I could trace, going back to March 2022, the surgery, Min's university, the motorbike, the roof, the house construction, itemized by transfer, the visa, the additional construction costs, the mesa, the additional construction costs, my own apartment, my living expenses, the bike, incidentals. I sat with the total for a long time. $71,000 of 85. My pension would cover my living costs, but only just, and only if nothing went wrong. I was a 54-year-old man sitting in a Da Nang apartment with $14,000 and a folder of photographs of a house I did not own. I said the phrase in my head, the old phrase, the one I'd been reaching for across 18 months of decisions. Assessed the situation, responded proportionately. I stopped before I finished it. I closed the laptop. I didn't open it again that evening. When Lynn came home, I was watching football on my phone, and I said nothing about what I'd found, because I didn't yet know what it meant. I needed to think. That was, I told myself, what I was good at. 2 weeks later, one of the expat Facebook groups posted about a brae near Ingai Hange Son. I almost didn't go. I almost didn't go because I'd spent 2 weeks telling myself I was thinking, when what I was actually doing was sitting with a number and not looking directly at it. The way you don't look directly at it. The brae was at a rented villa near the Marble Mountains, Ingi Hon Shun, the 5 stone peaks you can see from the coast road south of the city. The kind of villa expats rent for events because it has a big outdoor area and a proper grill and enough space that you don't have to talk to anyone you don't want to. About 20 people. Mostly Western men, the usual age range, 40s to mid-60s, and a few couples who had the specific comfortable ease of people who'd figured something out that the single men were still working on. I registered all of this the way I register most things. Force of habit. I stood near the grill because I cook, and because standing near a grill gives you something to do with your hands. Stefan was already there when I arrived, big man, not just tall, broad, the kind of build that comes from actual physical work over a long time rather than a gym. He was turning lamb chops with the methodical attention of someone who takes this seriously, which I respect. He looked up when I approached, nodded, moved slightly to give me access to the grill without being asked it. Small thing. I noted it. Within 10 minutes, we were speaking Afrikaans. I can't properly explain to someone who hasn't experienced it what it means to suddenly be speaking your own language after months of careful English. It's not just the words. It's the entire register, the rhythm, the shorthand, the jokes that don't need to be explained, the references that don't require context. Stefan was from Johannesburg, Sandton originally. Had worked for Eskom for 27 years as an electrical engineer before taking early retirement. 4 years in Vietnam. He knew Da Nang better than I did. He knew the city's rhythms, its bureaucratic textures, the specific ways it worked and didn't work. He didn't pry. He asked general questions. How long had I been here? Where was I based? What did I think of the city? He had the manner of a man who has seen enough to be patient about information, who knows that if you wait, people will eventually tell you what they came to say. I told him about Lynn. Generally at first, then with more detail. The relationship, the family, the surgery, which still seemed like the right thing to have done. And then, with the studied casualness of a man who has been wanting to say something for 2 weeks, I mentioned the house, the land in Queen Nung, the construction, the visa agent. Stefan went still, not dramatically. He just stopped turning the chops for a moment. He asked a few quiet questions. Who held the land title? How I'd been referred to the visa agent? What the construction costs had looked like over time? I answered each one accurately, because he was asking in the tone of someone who already knew the answers and was giving me the opportunity to arrive there myself. Then he said it. Boet. I'm not saying she doesn't care about you. I'm saying the two things are not mutually exclusive. I've replayed that sentence many times. What I felt in that moment wasn't shock. Shock would have been easier. What I felt was the specific unpleasantness of having your own arithmetic confirmed by someone else's. Like when you suspect a structural problem in a building, and someone with more experience points to the exact crack you've been avoiding looking at directly. Stefan laid it out without anger, without drama. The structure he described, land in the family name, Foreigner funds the construction, family maintains it indefinitely, was, he said, not uncommon. Not always deliberate. Sometimes it was simply the path of least resistance when a foreign partner had money and a Vietnamese family had land and need. But the visa agent referral connected to a partner was a different thing. That was a kickback arrangement, almost certainly. Tuin would have received a percentage of the 6,200. The referral chain existed because it was profitable, not because Tuin was the best option available. He wasn't telling me Lynn was a villain. He was careful about that, and I appreciated the care. He was telling me I had been, in the logistical sense I would have understood from my working life, a resource that had been efficiently allocated. Some of that allocation may have come from genuine feeling. Some of it came from something else. The two things were not mutually exclusive. I drove home that night and did not sleep well. The 6 weeks that followed were quiet in the way that a room is quiet when someone is listening very carefully. I did not confront Lynn. Confrontation would have required a clear binary, a thing that was either true or not, and I was no longer certain I was dealing with binaries. Instead, I watched. I started noticing things I'd let pass before, the way she handled certain topics by redirecting, the interval precision between requests, small things that individually meant nothing. I requested a meeting with Tuin at his shopfront on Le Douane. I arrived without Lynn and asked him a series of specific questions about the company registration, legal structure, renewal process, my actual rights and obligations under the arrangement. His answers were the answers of a man who had not expected to be asked these particular questions in this particular sequence. He had the trained smoothness of someone skilled at managing the general, not the specific. I thanked him and left. 2 days later I asked Lynn, once, carefully, whether she knew Tu Phan personally or professionally. She said just through people. She said it without hesitation, which told me she'd had an answer ready. I let it drop. I knew what it meant. Sitting with the knowledge was one thing. Saying it out loud was another, and I wasn't ready for what saying it out loud would require me to do next. What came next was not a confrontation. I want to be clear about that, because people expect a confrontation. A raised voice, an accusation, tears, someone walking out. It wasn't like that. It was a Sunday afternoon. I remember the ceiling fan was doing its usual intermittent work, and there was karaoke from somewhere 2 streets over, some man giving a song everything he had, and I told Lynn I was going to go home for a while. She asked how long. I said I didn't know. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she cried. Not performatively. The tears were real. I am as certain of this as I am of anything. That is the part one find hardest to explain to people, because they want a villain, and she wasn't one, and the tears were real, and the money was still gone, and both of those things are true simultaneously, and the space between them is where the whole story actually lives. She didn't ask about the house. Not once. She didn't ask about the house. Not once. She didn't ask whether I expected anything back, whether there was anything to settle. The silence around the house was its own answer. She knew what it meant. I knew what it meant. We'd both known, probably for some time. Neither of us said it. I booked a flight to Johannesburg on a Monday morning. I did not tell her the date. My son Peter picked me up from OR Tambo at 6 in the morning. He's 31, works in logistics, which I've always thought was either irony or inheritance. I'm not sure which. He was waiting at arrivals with a coffee for me, which he handed over without a word, and he didn't ask questions on the drive to Pretoria. I hadn't asked him not to ask. He just knew. I've been told I'm not easy to talk to. He's learned how to be around me anyway. That took him a long time. I think about that. I couldn't go back to the Sunnyside flat. I'd given it up before I left, canceled the lease, put my remaining things in a storage unit in Menlo Park. So I stayed in my daughter Anki's spare room for the first 3 weeks. She lives in Pretoria East with her husband and a dog that doesn't trust me yet, which seems appropriate. The first morning she made vet coke, didn't announce it, didn't make it an occasion, just put a plate on the table and went to make more coffee. I ate 4 of them and didn't say much, and she didn't ask me to. Small dignities. You collect them when there's not much else to collect. The damage, when I finally wrote it out in the kind of plain language you'd use for a debrief. $71,000 of $85,000. Gone. Not stolen in the night. not taken in one dramatic act, but gone across 18 months in amounts that each felt considered, each felt proportionate, each felt, and this is the word I keep returning to, reasonable. The house in Qinghai exists. I have the photographs. There are walls, a roof, an electrical connection, a water tank. It belongs in every legal sense to a family I will in all likelihood never see again. The business visa registration produced a document I have no practical use for in South Africa. My pension arrives on the 25th of each month. R18,000, roughly 980 at current rates. It covers basics. I am not destitute. But I am 54 years old, starting again, with $14,000, and a pension that doesn't stretch much beyond food and rent. That is a particular kind of reckoning, and it doesn't resolve quickly, and it doesn't make a clean story. The months that followed were slow. The slow work of re-entry, which is not the same as recovery. It's more like relearning which surfaces are solid. I tried explaining Vietnam to people, and they would nod in a way that meant they understood the general shape of it. Man goes abroad, woman, money, comes home, without understanding the specific texture, which is the part that actually matters. After a while, I stopped trying to explain it fully. You can give people the outline. The interior they'll have to imagine. My children called more. Carefully at first, Pietro and Anki both treating me like something that might need to be handled gently, which I resented and also understood. Anki asked me once if I wanted to talk about it properly, and I said not yet, and she said okay, and that was that. The calls got less careful over time, more ordinary, which is what I wanted. Ordinary is what I'd been missing for a long time, before Vietnam, and then in Vietnam I thought I'd found it, and then I came home and had to start finding it again from a different position. I didn't go back to the Facebook groups, not the retirement ones, not the expat ones. I looked at the page once. Someone had posted a photo of a Da Nang sunset with a caption about cost of living, and I closed it and didn't open it again. I want to be honest with you about Lynn because I've agreed to be honest, and because I think the honest version is more useful than the simpler version. She was not a villain. I've thought about this enough times to be certain of it. More time than I should probably have spent sitting in Anki's spare room in the early mornings before the house woke up. The family's need was real. The affection, I believe, was real. And the structure, the slow accumulation of financial involvement, the visa agent referral, the construction costs that never quite stopped, that was also real, and it ran alongside the affection without canceling it out. I was genuinely a person she valued. I was also, simultaneously, a resource that a family in a difficult situation had learned to depend on. Both of those things were true. The two things were not mutually exclusive, and I was not a fool. I want to say that as well, because people who hear this story want to assign a simple, moral, naive man, calculating woman, cautionary tale, and that's not what happened. I was a man who arrived somewhere with savings, with loneliness he didn't fully account for, with a value system that made generosity feel like duty, and with the particular confidence of someone who has never been wrong in a professional context and has made the error of assuming this generalized ... The context in Vietnam was different. The variables I was used to tracking were different. And the thing about variables you don't track is that they still affect the outcome. If you're watching this because you're thinking about Vietnam, and I know you are, some of you, otherwise you wouldn't be here, I want to give you something practical before I finish, because I'm a logistics man, and that's how I think. Consult a Vietnamese lawyer before you move a significant amount of money for any purpose, property, investment, or business. Not a man in a Facebook group who's been there 11 years. A lawyer. This costs money and is worth it. When someone recommends a professional, a visa agent, a builder, an accountant, ask how they know that person. Ask specifically. The referral chain matters. And total your spending. Don't track it request by request, each one feeling discreet. Total it. Open the spreadsheet. The number at the bottom is the real number, and you need to see it clearly before it becomes the kind of number you can't do much about. I went to Vietnam thinking I was adaptable. And I was. Just not in the direction I intended. That's Kobus van der Merwe's story. And this is where we leave him. Not at rock bottom, not exactly, but at a point of real reckoning. $14,000, a pension, a spare room in his daughter's house, and the kind of clear-eyed account of his own mistakes that most people never manage. That last part is not nothing. Here at Inside Vietnam, we tell these stories because they're real, and because they're common, and because the version of Vietnam that gets sold to Western retirees on Facebook groups and retirement forums is not false. The weather is good, the food is extraordinary, the cost of living is genuinely lower, but it is incomplete. The missing variables are not hidden. They are simply not in the spreadsheet most people are running when they book the flight. Kobus didn't go to Vietnam chasing a fantasy. He went there running the numbers. The numbers were just missing a few variables. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're planning a move to Vietnam or anywhere in Southeast Asia, do your research. All of it. Not just the cost of living, the rest of it too. We'll see you next time on Inside Vietnam.